Every athlete leaves something behind. Not just records, but moments that changed the way the game felt. Some stories are loud. This one isn't. Tonight, we slow it all down. And listen. This is Justin Herbert documentary. The quiet rise of the NFL's most underrated star. It begins in the soft gray morning light of Eugene, Oregon. Before the records, before the roaring crowds, before the name Herbert meant anything to anyone beyond a quiet neighborhood, there was just a boy. Not the kind that commanded rooms. Not the kind who chased attention in hallways or raised his hand first in class. He was quieter than that. The kind of quiet that made people lean in, not back away. In a backyard behind a modest house, tucked beneath the wide, weeping branches of evergreen trees, he threw a football. Again and again, not for anyone, not for praise, just to throw it a little better than he had the day before. There was a stillness to him, even then, a calmness not easily taught, because some kids seem born in motion, some burn hot and quick, but others wait, others watch, others listen, and when you're that kind of quiet, the world doesn't always notice. But the wind does, the rain does, and sometimes the game does, too. It wasn't that he didn't have a voice. He just chose to save it, for moments that mattered. Teachers remember him as the boy who sat straight, even when no one was looking. His friends never quite knew if he was dreaming or planning. And when the neighborhood games got wild, loud, chaotic, he stayed composed. As if, even amidst the frenzy, he saw something they didn't. There's a kind of silence that feels soft. Justin's was different. It was weighted, intentional, a still lake with something deep beneath it. No one knew what it would become. Not yet, but even back then, you could feel something building. Like the first shift of wind before a storm. Before the newspaper mentions. Before the draft boards. Before the analysts who looked too fast and listened too little. He was building something, slowly. Quietly. Purposefully. A presence. A rhythm. A kind of internal pulse that never needed to shout to be heard. Maybe the world prefers its heroes louder. Maybe it's easier to cheer for swagger than for stillness. But somewhere in Oregon, a different kind of story began. The story of a boy who never needed to command attention. Because he already had gravity. And in time, that gravity would pull storms toward him, and hold steady. But not yet. First, the quiet. And the question, can the stillest voice guide the noisiest game? Can silence lead? Can it win? Something was coming. You just had to listen close enough to hear it forming. Childhood in Eugene moved like the riverbanks it was built beside, slow, deliberate, always whispering. In a town wrapped in gentle drizzle and tree-lined streets, noise wasn't what made you memorable. Consistency was. In the Herbert house, there were no speeches. No overbearing pep talks or training regimens. Just expectation, quiet, steady, unwavering. Justin's room overlooked the pines. He'd sit by the window sometimes, watching the gray light shift on the driveway. He wasn't idle. He was studying, observing. Some children asked questions loudly. Justin asked them inwardly, and waited patiently for the answers. At Sheldon High, the locker room often roared with energy. Boys becoming young men, trying on identities like helmets and pads. But there he was, calm in the corner, cleats laced, eyes forward. Not aloof, not absent, just grounded. He didn't need his voice to lead. He simply showed up first, left last, did more listening than talking. And what he noticed, he remembered. Teachers said you could count on him, not just for grades, but for stillness. If the class grew noisy, if the energy tilted, Justin's calm seemed to reset the room. Not by asking, but simply by being. He took honors classes, loved stories of how things worked, loved the method behind the madness. An affinity for biology began to bloom. To some, it seemed strange for a quarterback to stay so fascinated by cellular pathways. But not to Justin. He didn't see football and science as separate. He saw them as versions of the same truth. Systems, pressure, flow, timing. Dominoes falling precisely when nudged the right way. He moved through the world this way. Not slowly, but without waste. Even in conversation with friends, he'd pause before answering. As if every word mattered, and silence could carry its own kind of weight. Those who knew him best didn't need him to be loud. In fact, they came to value the stability he offered when things broke down. Show up, do the work, leave no fingerprints behind. That was the rhythm. A teammate once said he'd never seen Justin scream. Not in frustration, not in celebration. Just subtle nods, small smiles, like everything inside him was calibrated for a different volume. But even with all his calm, he wasn't distant. He laughed, he played, and when the moment came, he competed. Fiercely, but never frantically. Off the field, he helped clean up after practice without being asked. On it, he scanned defenses like puzzles waiting to be solved. Some called him boring, but it's easy to mistake quiet for lack. And those who did, they weren't looking close enough. Because in that quiet young man was precision, grace, and a love for challenge. Not for the chaos of it, but for the clarity behind it. He saw patterns where others saw pressure. Structure where others saw collisions. His world moved at the same speed, but with a different tempo. A coach said you could throw the entire playbook at him and never watch him flinch. He wasn't fast with his feet, but his thoughts? Unusually quick, orderly, intentional. In time, that mental cadence would become his weapon. Not his size, not his speed, but the way he processed. Unshaken, unrushed. And the more the noise grew around him, the more his calm became magnetizing. Because when everything starts spinning, the quietest one often becomes the center. It's said that some people are raised by their town. In Justin's case, his town shaped him gently. Rainfall as metronome, mountains as posture. A culture that valued work over words, roots over reach. Even now, Eugene still carries his imprint, not in celebration banners, but in the dust of weight rooms he once swept clean. In the quiet pauses between Friday night lights. A boy who never needed to own the room, because he understood the power of leaving one better than you found it. And as he grew, so did the quiet inside him. Not shrinking, not hiding, becoming. Something was being built, slowly, invisibly, inside those Oregon mornings. And soon, the silence would start to speak. The Herbert house sat with the kind of quiet that didn't come from emptiness, but from intention. A calm home on a quiet street, where discipline walked softly, and love didn't need volume to be heard. Football lived there, but it didn't roar. Justin's grandfather, Rich Schwab, once caught passes on the same Oregon field that loomed like a memory in the town's fog. The echoes of those cheers had long faded, but heritage doesn't yell. It waits. It watches. In that house, football wasn't pressure, it was inheritance. A hand-me-down language. Taught in hallway conversations and backyard reps. No trophies on mantles. No speeches about legacy. Just the ball, the grass, the rhythm of repetition. His father, Mark, played running back at the University of Montana before returning home, to Oregon, to raise his boys not into stars, but into good men. He coached, but never shouted. Taught, but never demanded. And from him, Justin learned that excellence starts in the quiet hours, long before game day. It was expected that you show up early. That you shake hands firmly. That you treat the custodian the same as the coach. This wasn't a household that celebrated hype. It celebrated work. Justin had two brothers, Patrick, and later, Mitch. 3 boys under one roof shaped by the idea that showing up wasn't optional, and showing off wasn't impressive. In the Herbert household, effort meant more than outcome. Dinner table conversations weren't about opponent rankings or highlight reels. They were about getting better. About what you learned when no one was watching. About doing your best, every time. Not so the world could see, but because it mattered. To this day, neighbors say they never heard shouting from inside that house. Only the steady rhythm of boys throwing passes in the yard. The subtle echo of cleats on pavement before sunrise. Justin, the middle child, didn't try to stand out. He just tried to get it right. He cleaned his own gear. Kept his room orderly. Spoke when it was time. And when he trained, he didn't ask for an audience. It wasn't humility for show. It was just how he was raised. He learned that strength could be quiet. That leadership didn't need spotlight. And that if you walked into a room and didn't talk, people might still stop and listen. Because there was always something grounding about him. Something passed down, maybe. Something stitched into the fiber of old game film and shared last names. In time, coaches would say Justin acted like someone older. Like someone who had already seen how fragile a dream can be if you don't guard it carefully. Maybe that's what legacy does, not weigh you down, but remind you not to drift. He began carrying the Herbert name not like a flag, but like a compass. He didn't want to go the loudest path. He wanted the right one. Recruits from around the country gave interviews, videos, noise. Justin focused on his footwork. Took extra chemistry credits. Helped his brothers with drills in the yard. And when asked about his grandfather's Oregon days, he didn't quote stats or glory. Just smiled, and said how special it felt, knowing he wore a jersey someone else once earned. There's a word for that kind of memory, silent. But not small. Sometimes, a family doesn't shout its dreams. It whispers them, carefully, like prayers. In the Herbert house, football wasn't everything. But it held everything together. And as Justin walked forward into his own future, he didn't need to blaze a new trail. He just needed to walk the one already paved, quietly, purposefully, with both pride and humility. Because some legacies don't begin with declarations. They begin with footsteps on familiar grass, and the sound of the game returning home. It happened on a quiet field, under April skies that didn't warn, didn't shout. Just one step, one turn, one sudden give, and the bone in his leg betrayed him. No scream, no drama, just a boy on the ground, holding still, more from habit than shock. And somewhere in the silence that followed, the air around Eugene seemed to pause. Baseball season was over. Football season looked far away. And for a while, so did the future. Up until then, Justin's story had been one of quiet momentum. Steady rise, calculated growth. But sometimes, the body interrupts the plan. Sometimes, misfortune arrives without a knock. He didn't cry to the sky or curse the ground. He got up, slowly, carefully, and kept his mouth shut. There's something about injury that humbles a young athlete backward. Takes the game away, peels back the layers. What's left, when the crowds fall silent and the cleats are stored? Justin didn't rush the answer. He limped into it. Weeks stretched long. Crutches became routine. And film study replaced reps. He watched instead of played. Listened instead of ran. And somewhere in that stillness, a different kind of strength began to grow. The kind not built in weight rooms, but in waiting rooms. Late at night, when the throbbing wouldn't let sleep settle, he wondered, quietly, inwardly, if anyone was still watching. If any scout still cared. If the dream had evaporated without even disturbing the dust. Some coaches stopped calling. Some lists stopped including his name. To others, he had become a question mark. But where attention faded, awareness formed. He began seeing things differently, not just how the game worked, but how his mind did. Patience became a muscle, reflection, a teammate, and in those long days without a helmet, Justin began to understand something many players don't learn until after it's over. You are not the game. You are who you are when the game disappears. And if you still choose to come back, without certainty, without spotlight, it's real. Because you've tasted something raw. something disappointing, and come back anyway. He kept rehabbing, quietly, relentlessly, spared the melodrama, skipped the social media updates. Only his family knew how much it hurt to walk those first steps. How much it meant to take them fully. He healed in peace, trained in shadows, and when he returned, it wasn't with a roar. It was with a clip of tape across his leg, a steady gaze, and the same old rhythm. He wasn't faster, wasn't shinier, but something had changed. Beneath the surface, you could feel it, a boy who no longer just wanted to play, but who'd learned what it meant to almost lose the chance. Most never noticed that season. The stats didn't pop, the stars next to his name didn't grow. But somewhere in those late October games, Oregon's coaches started leaning in again. Watching differently, there was something new to his game. Not flash, not flair, but fight. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that stays. And though other schools looked past him, looking for louder arms, bigger frames, Oregon didn't forget. They offered him a spot, not because the room roared his name, but because they could hear, faintly, the weight of something being built. A leg had broken, but something deeper had formed. And after all, sometimes it's the cracks that let the light in. While other quarterbacks memorized playbooks, Justin visualized cause and effect. He didn't just want to win games, he wanted to understand them. What made a play fail? Not just the decision, but the link before it? The angle? The timing? To most, that level of analysis was atypical. To Justin, it was natural. He saw systems, not just outcomes. It wasn't enough to know a defender might blitz. He wanted to understand what triggered him to shift his weight, what opened the lane, how one misstep in protection created a fracture in 5 moving pieces. And so, while others gathered speed and swagger, Justin turned inward, not to hide, but to study. At Oregon, his balance between science and sport became mythic. Chemistry labs in the morning, practice by noon, evening classes that asked him to draw molecular diagrams of organic reactions, before returning to memorize defensive fronts before sunrise. Some wondered, why split focus? Why master science while being groomed to lead an offense? But to Justin, there was no split. Both were pressure-based puzzles. In biology, it was homeostasis, systems regulating themselves through reaction and feedback. In football, it was pocket movement, chaos folding inward, searching for a counterbalance. One Friday night, while teammates studied film, Justin stayed late in a lab trying to identify ribosomal reactions. And when asked later if it cost him preparation, he shook his head. Everything teaches something, he said quietly. To see the whole field, you have to understand how small things connect. It wasn't a metaphor to him. It was a method. Each lineman, a molecule in motion. Each play, a chain reaction. A game-winning drive, no different than a successful experiment, built on layers of observation, trial, and instinct calibrated by study. He could tell you which way a safety might shade, not just because of formation, but because of how they'd reacted on tape, 4 games ago, in the third quarter, against a similar route. His mind didn't guess. It sequenced. His backup once joked, Justin doesn't call audibles, he runs simulations. But beneath the humor lived intrigue. Because while others thrived on adrenaline, Justin breathed in logic. Emotion never hijacked his decisions. Ego never rushed them. He wasn't frozen, he was focused. And slowly, that focus became contagious. Coaches trusted him to dissect film alone. Teammates began to ask him questions once reserved for mentors. And even professors raised eyebrows at how intently the quarterback engaged with ideas meant for future med students. There's a different kind of intelligence in those who lead through comprehension, not control. And Justin carried that, with a spiral as tight as his arguments. A cadence as measured as his logic. He may not have barked commands in the huddle, But when he spoke, players listened, because he'd already thought it through 5 steps deeper than most would bother to see. In a sport overflowing with instincts and improvisation, his method was rarer. He didn't suppress creativity, he refined it. Even now, his footwork on film looks less like reaction, and more like choreography, steps chosen, not stumbled. 1 foot here to draw the linebacker. A look left to freeze the safety. A delay half-second longer, not fear, but patience. All constructed with the mind of someone who never stopped asking, why does this work? And when does it break? To some, it may seem clinical. But beneath the precision lived a quieter kind of poetry. Because in Justin's world, even chaos had logic. Even blitzes could be understood, if you paid enough attention. And so he continued. Study sessions before sunrise. Reps until fingers bled. Adjustments on boards, on film, in practice. Building not just his body into a quarterback, but his mind into the rarest kind of threat. The one that doesn't just react to the storm. It knows how the storm formed. And where it will strike next. Not every journey begins with a fanfare. Sometimes, all it takes is one quiet yes. By the time high school ended, Justin's phone wasn't glowing with offers. The 5-star rankings had skipped his name. Recruiters had taken their clipboards elsewhere. And the noise that gifted others wings passed him by in silence. But not everyone was distracted by noise. Not Oregon, the school tucked just across the river from his childhood home. The place where his grandfather once ran routes in a forgotten era. The place where autumn Saturdays meant more than just football. It meant belonging, history, a shared breath between town and team. They saw beyond the silence. They saw a hometown boy with quiet command and earnest eyes. A frame still growing. A brain already decoding blitzes. A presence that didn't demand, but drew people in anyway. They offered him a spot. No parade. No viral post. Just a belief that sometimes the best stories are the ones without the hype. Justin didn't hesitate. No recruiting trips. No drama. He said thank you. He said yes. And that might have been the clearest sign of who he was. Because while others were drawn to bright lights, Justin returned to the grass he already knew. The field he'd dreamed on since boyhood. The stadium he once sat in as a fan, wrapped in green and gold, heart thudding through his jacket. He became a Duck not to prove them wrong, but to prove something quieter right. He wasn't listed first on the depth chart. He wasn't the poster recruit. He simply walked on campus, head down, sleeves pushed, heart open. And went to work. Freshman year, few outside the program knew who he was. No whispers on sports radio. No interviews over lunch. But inside the facility, coaches noticed. The way he asked questions no one else asked. The way he showed up prepared, before the room even filled. The way older players caught themselves listening when he finally spoke. And when the starting quarterback went down mid-season, there was no debate. Justin stepped in, quietly, steadily, ready, because while others had sought stages, he'd been studying blueprints. And in that first start, against rivals who didn't yet know his name, he threw for 6 touchdowns. No celebration dance, no puffed chest, just a calm jog to the sideline, and a helmet tugged off with a breath. Even the cameras didn't know what to make of him. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not yet, but systems don't care about timing. They care about execution. And Justin, as usual, was ready. He didn't demand the team. He earned it, one well-placed ball at a time. One soft-spoken correction in the huddle. One nod to a lineman whose mistake he'd already forgiven. And his teammates began to believe, not in the press clippings, but in what they saw in film rooms and meeting rooms and locker rooms. A leader who never made it about himself. A thinker, not just a thrower. A tactician, not just a talent. And when Oregon's crowds roared for him, when students wore his jersey, when kids scribbled his name in Sharpie on their cleats, he never raised his voice in return. He just kept showing up. Every day. Without expectation of applause. Because for Justin, the reward was never fame. It was fit. And for the first time, that fit felt real. He wasn't chasing the dream anymore. He was building it, one quiet Sunday. One practice representative at a time. Just across the street from where it all began. And though the world outside just began to notice, Oregon already knew. Their whisper of a quarterback had become a steady rhythm. A heartbeat, behind the roar. There's a rhythm that separates contenders from constants. A daily discipline, so quiet, it's almost invisible. While others stretched their arms toward spotlight, Justin extended himself toward structure. Morning lifts, afternoon lectures, evenings split between biology labs and game film. Where most saw football as escape from academics, Justin saw no need to choose. His mind held both. While teammates debated defensive coverages in the locker room, he analyzed chemical bonds in study halls. Not as a side interest. As a commitment. He was, technically, the face of the program. But face implies fame, and he never wore his recognition like that. He wore it like responsibility. Not to perform, to prepare. Game day began days before. Snap counts memorized with the same care as molecular pathways. Footwork tuned with the same patience he used in calculating reaction rates. In a sport that roars, he still moved like a murmur. But not out of timidity. Out of trust in process. Quarterback questions had begun to fade. He wasn't flashy, but he was always there. You'd miss him if you only looked for noise. But if you watched closely, you saw it. The way his shoulders squared before every throw. How he reset a protection call without barking. How he brought up a reserve lineman by name in interviews when no one else would have bothered. Quiet gravity has its own kind of pull. And soon, the team around him stopped needing fire to get motivated. They had their engine. Coaches let him lead without micromanagement. Players deferred to his steady eye. Reporters searched for a story that fit, but never quite knew how to frame it. Because what do you say about someone who plays like rain, calm, rhythmic, but impossible to ignore when sustained? He wasn't charismatic in the traditional sense. He rarely rallied crowds with shouting or gestures. But he remembered birthdays, helped freshmen with installs, stayed after practice not to impress but to refine. And in time, he stopped needing to prove anything. Because by then, his voice, when he used it, carried the weight of someone who rarely wasted a word. When a teammate messed up, he didn't punish them. He practiced beside them. When asked to explain a coverage read, he didn't just answer. He drew it up, pointed to tendencies, gave credit to others. Over time, the whispers grew. NFL chatter, analyst intrigue. But to Justin, intrigue meant less than timing. Accuracy. Growth. He was still seeking improvement, not validation. One teammate admitted later, he never once saw Justin walk with a strut. Only purpose. Not one chest pound. Just handshakes and film notes. In an era of flashing stat lines and self-promotion, he chose a subtler tone. One made of repetition, trust, precision. He was QB1. And he might have been the only one who didn't care about the label. Because behind that label wasn't a figurehead. It was a student. Of biology. Of football. Of structure and response. In labs, he tracked reactions. On fields, he triggered them. And as Oregon's offense began to hum, you could feel his influence in every quiet adjustment. Every pre-snap shift that looked routine. But unraveled defenses by design. Because there's a difference between confidence and command. One walks loud, the other walks sure. And Justin? He just kept walking, not needing anyone to follow. But giving them every reason to. It was supposed to be his final spring in Eugene. Eyes were on him. The NFL was near. Mock drafts painted futures in bright lights, and agents began circling like distant stars pulled closer. He had earned every right to leave. Put in the hours, taken the hits, led the huddle through doubt and rain and roar. There was nothing left to prove, not to critics, not to fans, not to teammates. But one thing stayed unresolved. His brother, Patrick, a tight end, had just committed to Oregon. And for Justin, who rarely spoke loudly about what mattered most, that mattered most of all. He didn't wait long. No elaborate post, no press conference, just a quiet announcement that he'd return. For Oregon, for his degree, and for a final year beside his brother. Most outsiders didn't understand. Why risk injury? Why pass on millions? Why wait? But not everything in life is a transaction. Some choices echo beyond the field, past the metrics and headlines. He knew the NFL would wait if it was meant to be. But moments with family wouldn't. To the world, it may have been loyalty. To him, it was just right. The type of decision you make not out of fear, but of clarity. That spring, Eugene exhaled. Their quarterback hadn't left when he could have. And among his teammates, it carried weight. Because when your leader stays, not for fame, but for something closer, smaller, more personal, it changes how you walk into battle. It was never about prolonging glory. It was about proximity to something he believed in. Time with his brother. Time with his team. Time in a place that had raised him from the quiet backyard throws to autumn's biggest stages. When Patrick suited up that fall, they didn't share grand speeches or dramatic embraces. Just knowing glances, subtle nods, two Herberts in the same huddle, same helmet decals, same quiet fire, and every pass to his brother wasn't just a completion. It was a memory forming live, between blood, between seasons, between shared years that none of them would get back once football moved on. Some people chase greatness by climbing ladders as fast as they can. Others take the extra step backwards to carry someone else forward, even if it means waiting longer to reach the top. Justin took that step, not for applause, but for presence. And like everything else in his story, it wasn't loud. It was steady. And somehow, in that final year at Oregon, with cameras circling and predictions rising, he managed to become even calmer. Even clearer. Not because the noise wasn't real, but because the quiet inside him had become louder. A kind of stillness forged by values that didn't shift with the season. Legacy wasn't status to Justin. It was service. It was time well spent. And that year, he spent it well. It ended where it began. Beneath Oregon skies thick with mist, on fields that had known his footsteps longer than the scouts had known his name. One last season. One last campaign waged not with declarations, but with execution. Justin didn't carry Oregon like a banner. He carried them like a memory. Steady hands. Quiet eyes. The weight of a program not worn, but carried the way you'd carry something fragile, not because it's weak, but because it matters. The stat lines weren't blinding, but the substance behind them? Unmistakable. And as the season wound tighter, inching toward its last note, one invitation rose above the rest. The Rose Bowl, that ancient garden of college football. Petals and pressure. Legends grown on grass watered by decades of echoes. It was January 1, 2020. Helmet on, chin dropped, shoulders set. Not every eye saw it as his moment. But Justin didn't need every eye. He never had. The game was a storm. Wisconsin brought fire, force, intention. But Justin? He brought gravity. 3 rushing touchdowns, strange, poetic justice for a quarterback never known for running. Each step into the end zone wasn't flash, it was proof. Proof that leadership doesn't have to come from the loudest mouths or fastest feet. That sometimes, it's the one who waits, who finally breaks through. He didn't spike the ball. He didn't dance. He jogged to the sideline. Nodded once. The kind of nod only someone who understands the full weight of effort can give. As the clock drained and Oregon clung to the lead, there was no speech from him. No cinematic final call, just a huddle, a final play, a shared breath, and then, a win. Confetti drifted like snow, slow and soft across the Pasadena sky. Bodies collided in elation, coaches shouted, cameras scanned, and in the middle of it all, he stood still. Helmet off, eyes scanning the crowd like he was searching for something only he would recognize. Maybe a memory, maybe a version of himself, the one who once sat in those stands years ago, wide-eyed, dreaming. He didn't raise the trophy with a roar. He lifted it like it was folded into the fabric of everything he'd already been building. The culmination didn't feel like a climax. It felt like a gentle landing. A circle drawn quietly, then closed. That game became his farewell. To home, to afternoons in labs, to late nights in film rooms with echoes of lessons no one else would hear. He walked off that field not larger than life, but fuller within it. Some quarterbacks sprint into the next stage. But Justin? He exhaled, returned to the locker room, packed slowly, and called his brother, not for glory, just to say thank you. His name was said in interviews. Draft questions floated above, analysts prepped their takes, but he said little. And somewhere in the stadium tunnels, as roses wilted and lights dimmed, he disappeared into the next chapter the same way he handled the last. Without noise, but with something better. Completion. The call came in a moment quieter than expected. No fireworks of sound, just the soft roll of breath before the sixth name in the 2020 NFL Draft was read. Justin Herbert, Los Angeles Chargers. There was no leap from the couch. No tears traced for primetime. Just a small, grateful smile. A handshake, a nod, as if the only person he needed to prove something to had already heard. The NFL Draft is a symphony of projection. Voices guessing, screens blinking, analysts dissecting frames per second. But for Justin, that moment wasn't permission. It was confirmation. The room where he sat that night wasn't lit for a spectacle. It was quiet, like always. Family around, no entourage, no branded backdrop, just walls that had once held childhood dreams. Dreams now unfolding. The Chargers handed him a jersey in electric blue. A color that didn't speak, but pulsed. Uncertain, expectant, the kind of spotlight that doesn't just shine, it sears. Los Angeles is many things. Loud, fast, demanding. A city of stars, where quarterbacks are supposed to dazzle first and deliver later. And into that city walked Eugene's quietest son. He didn't swagger. He didn't talk legacy before learning the scheme. He learned. He absorbed. He stood behind a veteran and waited his turn. Never once lobbying for the spotlight. Never once questioning the timeline. And then, in week 2, the call did come. Not from a front office this time, but from a trainer. At the last possible minute. A pregame shift. A shock. He would start. No warning. Few words. And just like that, thrown into the weight of the NFL, 1,000 voices swirling. A stadium half empty but fully alive. He took the field. First throw. Completion. Second. Confidence. Third. Downfield. He didn't freeze. He didn't stumble. He processed. And in that afternoon, he showed the league what some in Oregon already knew. He was built differently. Most rookies force it. He didn't. Most chase speed. He trusted timing. He threw for over 300 yards that day. Against the defending champions. With less than a minute of preparation. No fist pumps. No victory tweets. Just the same calm look in his eyes. The same quiet tuck of the helmet. The same gravity. After the game, questions flew. Where had this come from? But anyone who truly watched him, who listened instead of rushed to judge, knew the answer wasn't sudden. It had always been there. Unfolding slowly. Layered beneath quiet mornings. Biology books. Long rehab evenings. Study sessions that asked why, instead of how soon. The NFL was louder. But Justin didn't turn up his volume. He tuned the chaos downward. And within weeks, defenses scrambled, cameras followed, and coaches leaned in, not toward a showman, but toward a surgeon. Because that's what he was. Even under pressure, he read space like a science. His growth wasn't viral, it was inevitable. And every week, the storms swelled around him. But he held center, not by meeting them with noise, but by never giving the storm what it wanted. Fear. He lost some games, took some hits, made mistakes, but never once did the foundation crack. And in the locker room, a team rallied quietly around him. Because it's one thing to perform. It's another to remain unchanged by performance. He still asked more questions than he answered. Still studied tape like it held secrets only patience could solve. And slowly, surely, the NFL began to notice. Not just the arm, but the way he moved when no one's eyes were on him. The way he lifted teammates without explanation or spectacle. No speeches, just service. And maybe the biggest surprise wasn't how fast he adapted. It was how fully he stayed the same. A different uniform, a bigger stage, but still the steady pulse in the middle of expanding storms. Still that quiet rhythm, still that whisper that never asked to be heard. But now, couldn't be ignored. The season rolled on, and so did the questions. Was it a fluke? A flash in the pan debut? A quiet kid frozen too soon under neon lights? But Justin didn't answer with clips or catchphrases. He answered with rhythm. Each week, a new defense tested him. Man coverage entangled with disguised zones. Blitzes stacked, windows collapsed, expectations pressed inward like storm clouds. But Justin never blinked. He adapted. A misread in the first quarter became a touchdown in the third, because he'd already solved the puzzle by halftime. Mistakes weren't failures. They were inputs. Each throw fed a quiet databank in his mind, recalibrating, not so he could react, but so he could anticipate. And slowly, the league began to notice. Not just the numbers, though they shimmered. Yards by the thousands, touchdowns stacked, interceptions rare as storms without rain. But it was more than the box score. It was the serenity in chaos. A collapsing pocket, a collapsing game, and still, he stood upright, breath even, eyes deep. He didn't scramble wildly. He shifted, calculated, waited half a beat longer than most dared. Because he trusted the design. And if it broke down, he trusted himself to rewrite it in real time. Veteran defenders spoke of how hard it was to rattle him. Coaches on other sidelines repeated one phrase more often than any scouting cliché. He doesn't play like a rookie. But Justin never chased that compliment. Didn't wave it like a flag, didn't frame it in interviews. He simply accepted it, and raised the standard further. He handled press conferences like he handled pressure, steady posture, thoughtful pause, no wasted words. Reporters angled for storylines, but he gave them only truth. Not headlines, substance, not hype, presence. Inside the locker room, his teammates followed suit. Not louder, just sharper. Not rowdier, more focused. Because leadership, when done right, reshapes not just action, but environment. And that's what Justin brought. Not declarations, culture. After one hard loss, 42-zip, no silver lining in sight. He didn't rant, didn't sulk. He shook hands, took blame where it belonged, even when it didn't. The cameras caught none of it. But his teammates did. In weight rooms the next morning, they followed his lead. Not in drills, in demeanor. He walked through defeats the same way he walked through wins. Balanced, shoulders square, eyes straight ahead. Because to him, the game wasn't about proving he belonged. He already knew he did. It was about building something that could last. Play by play, reputation by repetition, he carved space in a league that rarely gives it. And the more he did, the more it became clear. He wasn't here for a moment. He was here for the long version. The kind of quarterback who doesn't burn bright and vanish, but warms a team from the inside, season after season. He didn't chase records, they chased him. He didn't shout for respect. He moved in ways that made silence feel like the highest acknowledgement. Rookies usually chase the comfort of coexistence. Justin? He built command through consistency. And in year one, after throw, long after the headlines cooled and new stories launched, he stood where few had. Not on billboards, but in belief. A belief stronger than hype. Stronger than flash. Something earned in ways stat sheets can't always see. Because the league had its answer now. It wasn't about whether he belonged. It was about how far he might go. If the quiet kept growing. There's a difference between arrival and establishment. Justin had arrived, yes. Rookie records shattered, eyes turned, a city stirred from slumber. But the second season? That's where illusions fall away. The NFL adjusts, schemes harden, weaknesses aren't just noticed, they're circled. Sophomore years have a reputation. For regression, for exposure. But Justin treated it as continuity, another chapter, not a reset. He didn't talk about pressure. He didn't feed on projections. He just asked, quietly, what can I improve? And then he did. Arm strength was never the question. But it got sharper. Pre-snap reads? Faster. More layered. Deeper. Pocket presence? Calmer still. You could see it on third downs. The patience, the timing, like gears shifting in precision rather than panic. A safety drops, a linebacker cheats, and Justin sees it, not with flash but with fluency. And the throws? Windows that closed for other quarterbacks stayed cracked for him, just long enough, because he never hesitated unnecessarily but never rushed either. The Chargers started believing in new ways. Not just in his capacity to win a game, but to build a foundation. New coach, new system, new expectations. He adapted. Never once did he flinch at change. At reinstallation, at the weight of shouldering more. He just added it to the process. Another layer to study. Another vector to understand. Colleagues across the league used phrases like, pros pro, student of the game, ice in his veins. But inside the building, they used fewer words. They just followed. Because by now, Justin didn't need to establish rhythm, it emanated from him. At practice, his reps were deliberate, no throw wasted. In meetings, he didn't dominate conversation. He asked precise questions, the ones that made others reconsider what they thought they knew. What struck teammates most wasn't just the growth, it was the tone. There was humility in his hunger, a calmness in his commitment. He didn't behave like someone who'd made it. He behaved like someone determined not to waste what he'd been given. There were wins that season. Close ones. Statement ones. There were losses, too. The kind that crush playoff hopes in the final minutes. He handled them the same. Not with cynicism. Not with excuses. Just with notes. Adjustments. And effort. A late December game saw him scramble, full sprint, toward the sideline, dive for the pylon, and land just inches short. Afterward, tape revealed he could have slid. Preserved himself. But that's not how he played. Not recklessly, but all in. Every play mattered. Every inch asked to be earned, not planned for. Asked once by a reporter whether he felt like a star heading into year 3, he paused. Looked down, then up. I just want to be better than I was yesterday. It wasn't brand building. It was belief. Behind the numbers, behind the rising fantasy points and highlight reels, was a player still chasing internal thresholds. Not outward reward. There's something rare about that. Something stubbornly timeless in a player who leads from underneath. Not above. Who lifts, not leans. And the league began to realize, Justin wasn't caught in the middle of some meteoric rise. He was carefully forging a different kind of path. Measured, reliable, consistent. The kind you find behind dynasties, not in their introduction, but in their endurance. His second season ended like the first, not with a parade, but with confirmation that this wasn't a phase, not a bright moment, but the slow turning orbit of something real. And still, he wasn't satisfied, because for Justin, version 2 was never the end. It was still just a beginning. There's a moment every quarterback faces. Not in a huddle, not on a field, but alone, between games. When success becomes routine, and the outside world pushes louder than ever. Now what? For Justin, the numbers had stabilized, the expectations had ballooned, and the questions changed shape. No longer, can he do this? Now, why hasn't he done more? As if consistency should ignite confetti. As if composure was supposed to roar. But what the league didn't always celebrate was the grind in between. Not the viral throws. Not the black and gold chase for trophies. But the cold mornings. The narrowed focus. The endless, humble repetition behind the scenes. That's where Justin lived. In the third year, he was no longer the new face. No longer a novelty. He was tape. He was scheme prep. He was the target. Defenses circled him differently now, no longer curious, but commissioned to disrupt. And still, he read blitzes with a poise that felt patient, not passive. His release? Quicker. His checkdowns? Smarter. The mistakes? Fewer, but his responsibility every time. Because that's who he was. The type to digest an interception as a personal failure, even if the route broke early. He took the weight, always. Coaches saw it. That rare blend of hyper-accountability and emotional stillness. He didn't get rattled by media storms or post-game noise. Because he didn't play the game for snapshots or slogans. He played for timing, balance, connection. With the ball in his hands, his face didn't change. Neither did the hands that received it. Because trust compounds, and by year 3, receivers spoke of his precision like weather, they didn't question it. They adjusted to it. Every ball's catchable, one said. Because every ball's considered. And in those moments few witnessed, those long stretches after practice, where he stayed behind and re-threw routes no one criticized, he proved again. Growth isn't an event, it's a habit. On the sidelines during games, when plays went sideways, Justin didn't erupt. He rewound, reviewed, called teammates over not to correct them, but to understand. He wasn't gathering authority. He was building alignment. Because elite quarterbacks don't just manage plays. They synchronize people. The city around him sang louder. The comparisons grew heavier. Brady, Breeze, Manning. But Justin, he stayed grounded beneath it all. Not by refusing belief in greatness, but by refusing to chase it at the expense of consistency. Most players rise through adrenaline. He rose through clarity. His throws continued to thread seconds tightly, measured, not risky. Daring, but never desperate. He wasn't chasing fireworks, just first downs. And while others racked headlines for declarations, he waited for results. Some fans wanted flash. Wanted the loud wins, the camera calls, the storyline sealed by December. But in Justin's world, legacy isn't a one-night masterpiece. It's a slow canvas, one stroke at a time. Even in losses, even when red zone drives stalled or wins slipped by inches, teammates didn't question. They listened, they leaned in, because even in disappointment, Justin never lost command. Never ducked a microphone, never blamed an injury, never changed his tone, even when the season bent in the wrong direction. He simply returned to the routine. To game tape, to footwork drills, to the calm between storms. Because some leaders set fire. Others hold light steady. And what Justin held wasn't celebrity. It was standard, not loud, but lasting. He walked into year 4 not chasing legacy. Just mastery. Not loud about it, quietly recursive, turning over old plays, rereading old rhythms. The kind of self-reflection rare in a player so young, rarer still in one so gifted. Because what do you refine when the foundation already holds? Details. And Justin lived in the details. He studied protections like languages, pronouncing each call with care, building fluency not just for himself, but for the ones shielding him. He adjusted cadences, relearned timing with new receivers, asked questions in meetings that started conversations no one had thought to have. The Chargers were evolving. New faces, new system tweaks, new expectations that felt more like weights than wings. The city no longer looked to him in hope. It looked to him in need. And so, he showed up, again and again, not as savior, but as servant. "Whatever it takes," he said once, softly, when asked about pressure. It wasn't deflection. It was direction. Games came. Close games. Harsh losses. Narrow wins. And still, he stood in the pocket like it was sacred ground. Not unmoved, but unafraid. He threw with a sharper edge that season. Not because he was angry. Because he was accurate. Because film had revealed, minutely, how half-seconds opened lanes others never saw. And so he timed routes like heartbeats. Structured drives like paragraphs. If a completion moved the chains, he'd nod once, tuck the ball, jog back. No dramatics. No posing. Just resets. Perfection, to him, wasn't an outcome. It was a process repeated. In the locker room, the tone tightened, not with tension, but with purpose. Players didn't wait on speeches. They mirrored his expression. Calm, locked in, forward-facing. He raised his voice only when trust required it. Never to shame, always to align. When the season's grind tried to splinter morale, as injuries mounted, as media narratives wrote dips into arcs, he didn't argue with opinion. He responded with action. After one brutal overtime loss, when reporters waited to pick apart missed chances, he stood upright, helmet cradled, and simply said, "I didn't do enough." Not ego. Ownership. And back in the facility the next morning, he arrived first. Again, some watched him and searched for spark, the rah-rah, the rallying cry. But Justin had something else. A steadiness so firm it became contagious. Receivers trusted his eyes before they turned. Linemen heard his shift cues in footfalls, not volume. And the fire inside him? It burned backward, fueled the legs, calmed the hands. Fanbases screamed for post-game quotes. Social clips. Theatrics. He gave them silence when it made more sense. Because he knew what it meant to build past the moment. Build past setbacks and slips. Build something that could survive wind, time, spotlight. He wasn't chasing comparisons anymore. They walked toward him, and he brushed them aside, not out of arrogance. Out of focus. Because Justin wasn't becoming something. He was continuing it. No revelation. Just repetition. And for those who think greatness comes like lightning, they forget how long a thunderhead swells. He wasn't the storm. He was its stillness. There's a moment every quarterback comes to dread, no matter how poised. Not a pick six. Not a blindside hit. But the one where you do everything right, and it still doesn't work. Routes run crisp. Protection holds. Reads all checked. And yet, the throw falls incomplete. Or worse, the drive stalls, the scoreboard doesn't blink, and all that preparation evaporates like breath on glass. Justin learned this not in theory, not in classroom metaphors, but under stadium floodlights, when strategy met reality and results still slipped away. It wasn't unfamiliar territory. The league was merciless like that. But this time, it lingered. A mid-season stretch of losses. Not blowouts, but heartbreak. One-score games that stretched across 4 quarters then collapsed in closing seconds. People started counting again. Third down failures. Missed chances. The offense sputtering not because of noise, but despite the silence of perfect play design, leveled throws. Reporters circled. Questions shifted from, "How good is he?" to, "Why can't he finish?" Talk shows turned nuance into point totals. Justin? He said almost nothing. Behind closed doors, he watched every snap, staring deeper than ever, quieter than ever. Not searching for someone to blame. Just somewhere to grow. I missed this block of grass, he said once, pointing to a zone a foot wide on a 53-yard field. Not because anyone else had noticed, but because he had. His belief in process never faded. But belief doesn't protect you from frustration. And sure, he felt it. The mistakes others made that he took responsibility for. The drives that felt like symphonies with no finale. But emotions lived inside him like currents under ice. Present, powerful, but rarely cracked the surface. Instead, he recalibrated. More reps. More adjustments. Not louder. Deeper. In the locker room, his words grew even fewer. Until one afternoon, after another razor-thin loss, a teammate asked him point blank, "How do you stay calm?" Justin looked at him for a long moment. Then finally, "Because I'm not playing for calm. I'm playing for clarity." That word lived at the center of his approach. Not perfection. Not control. Clarity. Understanding the moment. Accepting its shape. And making the next decision better. He didn't draw strength from being unshaken. He drew it from knowing exactly what had shaken, and what hadn't. That stretch of the season never broke him. But it did bend something. Not resolve, not rhythm, just the shape of pursuit. He let go of trying to make every drive a statement. Stopped treating each throw like a verdict. And started returning to what he'd always trusted. Truth in repetition. Truth in rhythm. Truth in the work. The team felt it too. Meetings grew quieter but sharper. The energy shifted from hoping he'd save them, to knowing he'd guide them. And though the winds returned sweetly, slowly, he no longer rode their highs. Just as he hadn't sunk in the lows. In time, those who watched closely saw it. He wasn't sealing games with hero plays. He was stitching consistency through every possession, drive by drive, mistake by correction, breath by read. Because Justin had realized something essential. Leadership isn't about lifting everything alone. It's about staying anchored when everything tilts. And if you do that enough, you don't need to chase the moment. You become the one constant inside it. There are some seasons that feel less like chapters and more like thresholds. You don't flip into them. You enter them, through fire, fatigue, and the slow ache of earned understanding. For Justin, this next phase wasn't about recognition. It was about integration. He had already proven he belonged. But now, he was being asked to embody. The Chargers inked a long-term deal. The kind with commas and headlines. The kind that comes with weight. Not flashy digits to him, just new responsibility. More time to build, he said quietly. More chances to get it right. Others might have celebrated, flaunted, framed it as arrival. But Justin did what he always did. He went back to the weight room. Back to film. Back to the repetition that never cared what your contract was. Because commitment, to him, wasn't a one-day agreement. It was a daily practice. He didn't feel richer. He felt tasked. And the task? To become the quarterback not just who leads a team, but who raises its ceiling. In camp, his throws looked tighter. Not stronger, more intuitive. A kind of lived-in sharpness. He no longer had to think his way through formations. He felt them now. Less calculation, more intuition. Built over thousands of reps, thousands of film frames clicked forward, paused, rewound. He didn't abandon science. He just learned to trust pattern. And as the season unfolded, you could see it. A quarterback whose piece wasn't passive but prepared. He threw touchdowns not like weapons, but like answers. And when drives stalled, when plays broke, when defeat hovered, he didn't hang his head. He found his teammates, met them at eye level. Explained calmly, not to correct, but to connect. Because clarity, like gravity, pulls people in. On a cold Sunday in November, down 2 scores, time bleeding, fans restless, he didn't rush. He built. 7-yard outs, 12-yard seams. A quarterback who understood architecture better than theatrics. He marched them downfield not with bravado, but with belief. They scored, held, scored again, and when they won, he didn't celebrate. He exhaled, shook hands, quiet in the chaos. A player once told a reporter, "He's not our quarterback because he makes magic. He's our quarterback because he makes us calm." That calm, in silence, had become contagious. And though highlight reels clipped his throws, they missed the best part. The steady head turning toward his lineman. The nod at a receiver coming off a drop. The passing phrase before the next drive, "We're fine." Because they were. They were learning that their floor was now what used to be their ceiling. And Justin? He wasn't reaching for greatness. He was letting it catch up. One red at a time. One huddle at a time. One season, quietly turning into a foundation. Not for stardom, for something better. Sustainability. Some quarterbacks collect spotlights. Justin collected moments. Small ones. Invisible to most. An extra representative after practice. A 2-minute conversation with a rookie lineman. A hand on a shoulder after a tough loss. No phrases, just presence. By now, the idea of him had stretched far beyond Oregon. Beyond draft night. Beyond rookie questions and sophomore surprises. He had become something else. Not just the centerpiece of an offense, but a compass for how to be. It wasn't that he played perfect. In truth, games still slipped. Throws misfired. Wins came and went. But he owned every piece. Every yard. Every inch missed. Not to prove his reliability, but to uphold it. You could see it in the way receivers trusted him more than the route itself. Or in the way defenders never celebrated too early, knowing if the ball was still in his hand, the script wasn't done. He had that kind of respect now. Earned, not granted. And not just in-house. Across locker rooms. Across division lines. Veterans would pull him aside post-game. "You see the whole field," one whispered. And Justin, still sweaty, still chasing improvement, only nodded. Because praise wasn't his fuel. Precision was. That season, a drive in the rain, fourth quarter, 60 yards to go, captured it best. Not a single throw longer than 15 yards. Nothing viral. Just completion stitched carefully together. A quarterback drawing a line in the storm, steady hand, sure angles. When the touchdown came, he didn't leap into celebration. He jogged, quiet, because the point had never been the end zone. It had been the integrity of the path. And still, you'd never catch him saying things like legacy. Even now, handed the reins, the contract, the locker room heartbeat, he still packed up his own helmet. Still stayed late. Still asked, "What did I miss?" Some said he lacked charisma. Because they thought leadership meant volume. But charisma comes in many forms. There was strength in his brevity. Depth in his stillness. In meetings, he spoke sparingly. But when he did, his teammates stopped, as if quiet had taken new shape in the room. Even coaches adapted, not molding him into the mold of past greats, but letting him grow as himself. He wasn't the next anyone. He was the first him. A quarterback who saw each Sunday not as a spectacle, but as a sequence. A series of steps. Calm, determined, even in loss. Especially then. Because grace was not something he borrowed in comfort. It was something he chose in adversity. And as the league turned over, fast offenses, louder huddles, personalities packaged for primetime, Justin lingered just behind the noise. Steady, watching, calculating, and then releasing, spirals sharp as silence. Some players climb to greatness. Others become a part of its infrastructure. And in those moments when things broke down, when the cameras zoomed, and the world asked, "What now?" his response was always the same. Measured breath, chin up, eyes downfield. A leader not just of men, but of moments. There had always been weight in his walk. Not because of fame, not because of expectation, but because he carried everything himself. Wins, losses, mistakes he didn't make but took anyway. That's who he was. A quarterback who never pointed, only reached. So when the team hit turbulence, injuries mounting, margins shrinking, headlines turning unsure, he didn't flinch. He narrowed his focus. Smaller steps, sharper execution. Injuries changed the offense. Weapons shuffled. Playbooks revised in real time. Some quarterbacks panic in personnel shifts. Justin recalibrated. He adjusted cadence for new linemen. Tweaked timing for unfamiliar routes. Made room in his reads for release valves others wouldn't look twice at. Every play, he saw the difference. A rookie tackle a half-step slow. A backup tight end drifting early on the break. But he didn't berate. He adapted. That season, some drives fell apart. Not from failure, just erosion. Too many variables. Not enough rhythm. Still, he found ways. A second reaction here. A third red check down there. Escape routes built not with feet, but with foresight. And when asked how he stayed composed, he answered without hesitation, because someone has to. He wore the pressure like he wore the jersey, not as protection, but as purpose. In the fourth quarter of a cold road game, down 5, clock dwindling, crowd against him, he stepped into the huddle without a raised voice. Just calm, let's go earn this. And they nearly did, not with big shots or desperate throws, but with poise. 4 completions. A scramble across midfield, then a final play, perfectly timed, and dropped. He picked up the receiver. Gripped his face mask gently. "No one play defines you," he said. And meant it. The post-game press wanted reaction. Fire. Frustration. Drama. Instead, they got this. "I'd trust them. I'll trust them again next time." Because leadership isn't about the moments that go right. It's about how you carry the ones that don't. He went back to work. Same schedule, same study, same silence. And little by little, things turned. Not all at once, but enough. Enough for teammates to follow. Enough for fans to see beyond numbers, beyond records. To see the man himself. Steady, still, present, not chasing narrative, just living truthfully in it. And for all the talk of winning windows, clutch genes, quarterback eras, Justin kept proving that sometimes greatness isn't a spark. It's a long burn. Quiet, patient, undeniable. There are seasons when growth is visible. Stat sheets, win streaks, headlines. But others are quieter. Built beneath the skin of a team. Justin's most recent season didn't come with a roar. No viral moment. No MVP campaign. Just work. Just repetition. And in that repetition, something deepened. The footwork, cleaner. The decisions, snapped into place like muscle memory. He was no longer reacting in the pocket. He was anticipating. Gliding through reads like pages he'd already memorized. Around him, the roster shifted. Injuries returned. Coordinators came and went. And yet, he remained. Unshaken, unresentful, still the calm between shifting tides. Reporters kept asking, "When is the breakout?" But what if this stability, this relentless refinement, was the breakout? He'd reached the point where throws didn't surprise anymore. Even the perfect ones felt expected. Because he'd made excellence look repeatable. He wasn't chasing spotlights. He was chasing self-mastery. Long after games, long after the press cleared and stadiums emptied, he'd be found with tablets, still scanning film. Not looking for praise, looking for fractions. That tiny shoulder twitch that baited a linebacker. That half-second longer he could have held the safety with his eyes. It wasn't guilt. It was standard. Leadership no longer meant just setting tone. It meant being the tone. The locker room echoed it. Players talked less about hype, more about process. They started showing up earlier, leaving later, And when younger quarterbacks visited, shared moments, jersey swaps, Justin gave what he had, not answers. Guidance. See it slowly, he'd say. Then speed it up. Fans still wanted the titles. The playoff eruption. The coronation. But Justin wasn't orchestrating a parade. He was constructing permanence. There was a moment mid-season, late in a tied game, third and long, crowd on edge. Most would force it, gamble. He dumped it down. Safe, smart, trusted the punt, trusted the defense. Some booed, some questioned, but in the film room? It was perfect, and his teammates saw it. Because maturity at quarterback isn't just made in touchdowns. It's forged in restraint, and the few who've reached that tier know. Sundays aren't stages. They're laboratories. Each drive, a new hypothesis. Each adjustment, a quiet recalibration. That's where Justin lived now. Not above the game, inside it, fully aware, fully accountable. He might not bark orders. He might not sell shoes. But he leads men, steadies moments, elevates expectations just by showing up exactly the same, every time. And when the clock winds down, and the lights go out, and the silence settles after win or loss, he doesn't vanish. He resets. Because his arc isn't defined by the climax. It's defined by the constancy. Not a flash in the dark, but the hum beneath it all. Seasons end, records are updated, names shift from headlines to history. But some legacies linger. Not through noise but through presence. Justin never chased the story. He just lived it, and in doing so, gave others a new script to follow. One written in early mornings, in the repetition no one records, in the questions asked not to impress, but to understand. You rarely saw him gesture at the crowd. But he always pointed to teammates after touchdowns. You never heard him speak in absolutes. Just reflections, details, the next step. His is not the legacy built on viral moments. It's built on months of work that kept stacking on top of each other. Quietly, relentlessly. The spiral of his pass became a signature not because it dazzled, but because it arrived the same way every time. Precise, prepared, unassuming. He never asked to be the face, but became the foundation, the calm breathing beneath every tense game. Over his career, he has shaken more face masks in support than fists in celebration. Has thrown for miles and lifted more than numbers. He has lifted belief. Belief that a player doesn't need to be boisterous to lead. Belief that focus can lead, patience can win, and simplicity does not mean smallness. He has worn every jersey, from childhood green to pro blue, not to become someone, but to stay himself. Not perfect, but constant, and in time, the noise around him softened. Analysts found fewer flaws to fix. Fans found steadiness instead of spectacle. And franchises found something harder to define, a quarterback who built not just an offense, but a way of being. He might never give the loudest speech. Might never fire up pregame with practiced fury. But when the game goes silent, when all that's left is the huddle and the down, and the belief, they turn to him. And he nods. One small moment. So grounded, it holds everyone steady. Because that's what he became. Not a flash, but a framework. A career built upon precision. A legacy whispered patiently into cold mornings and long seasons. And someday, when time pulls him from the field, and someone new stands where he once stood, they'll speak of him not in shouts, but in stillness. Not in volume, but with reverence. Because some quarterbacks lead the league. Justin Herbert quietly led the way.